Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. A Quiet Place 2018 Movie Review. A Quiet Place is a 2018 American post-apocalyptic horror film directed by John Krasinski. Made from a screenplay co-written by Krasinski, Scott Beck, and Brian Woods based on a story Beck and Woods conceived, it tells the story of a mother, Emily Blunt, and father, Krasinski, who struggle to survive and raise their children, Millicent Simmonds and Noah Jupe, in a post-apocalyptic world inhabited by blind extraterrestrial creatures with an acute sense of hearing. Beck and Woods developed the concept for the story while in college and began writing the screenplay in January 2016. They told Platinum Dunes producers that they wanted Blunt for the role of the mother. In July 2016, Krasinski read their script for the role of the father. Krasinski was announced as director, co-writer, and co-star with Blunt in March 2017. Filming took place in upstate New York from May to November 2017. A Quiet Place premiered at South by Southwest on March 9, 2018 and was released in the United States on April 6, 2018 by Paramount Pictures. It grossed more than $340 million worldwide and received critical acclaim. A Quiet Place was chosen by the National Board of Review and American Film Institute as one of the top 10 films of 2018. The film received nominations for the Golden Globe Award for Best Original Score, the Academy Award for Best Sound Editing, and the Writers Guild of America Award for Best Original Screenplay. Blunt won the Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by a Female Actor in a Supporting Role. It is the first film in the A Quiet Place universe. Its sequel, A Quiet Place Part 2, was released in 2020. Sightless aliens with sharp hearing and impenetrable armored skin have taken over the planet and killed most of the human population. The Abbott family, father Lee, mother Evelyn, deaf daughter Reagan, and sons Marcus and Bo, live on their isolated farm in the middle of a forest in Millbrook, New York, and have survived by taking precautions such as laying sand paths to avoid stepping on crunching leaves and using American Sign Language when communicating. When the family goes into the nearby town for supplies, Bo finds a toy space shuttle, but Lee takes out the batteries and makes Bo leave it behind due to the noise it would make if powered on. As they are getting ready to leave, Reagan returns the toy to Bo without its batteries, but Bo takes the batteries without anyone noticing. While walking back home, Bo activates the toy, which starts making noise. Almost immediately, Bo is killed by a nearby alien before Lee can reach him. Reagan suffers terrible guilt after Bo's death. She hides her feelings of guilt from her parents, although Marcus is aware of them. Over a year after Bo's death, Evelyn is pregnant with a fourth child. Lee is trying to build a working hearing aid for Reagan, but can't master the electronics. The attempt causes a high-pitched noise, but does not improve hearing. Marcus reluctantly goes fishing with Lee while Reagan, upset that she cannot go, visits Bo's grave. While the rest of the family is away, Evelyn goes into labor. While heading to the basement, she accidentally steps on an upright nail and drops a photo frame, alerting a nearby alien which enters the house. Struggling to stay silent amidst the pain, Evelyn flips a switch in the basement, turning the surrounding lights around the house red. The alien enters the basement soon after, but Evelyn distracts it by setting off an egg timer and escapes upstairs. Upon returning to the farm and seeing the red lights, Lee instructs Marcus to lure the alien out of the house by lighting off fireworks, allowing Evelyn to safely give birth to her baby. Reagan, seeing the fireworks, runs back to the house. Lee enters the house armed with a shotgun and finds the baby and Evelyn, then brings them into a hiding spot under the floor in the barn outside. The baby cries, and a creature enters the barn. The alien fails to find the source of the noise, but breaks some water pipes. Evelyn wakes up in the flooded hideout with the alien still inside and hides behind the falling water to mask her and the baby's sound. Marcus and Reagan climb to the top of a corn silo and light a signal fire to alert their father, but after the fire dies, Reagan wants to leave. In trying to stop her, Marcus falls into the silo, and a segment of the roof that he fell through falls in after him. Regan jumps in after him and guides him onto the fallen roof segment, but then gets sucked into the corn, disappearing from sight. Marcus reaches in and, feeling Regan's hand, is able to pull her out. However, hearing the commotion, the alien, which is hunting for Evelyn, runs towards the silo and attacks Regan and Marcus. Unbeknownst to Regan, as she attempts to use the hearing aid her father was building, she fails to see the alien behind her, and the faulty disruptive effect of the hearing aid emitting a high-pitched whine, causes the creature to reel in pain and retreat, breaking a hole in the silo which frees the children. Lee finds Regan and Marcus and directs them to his truck when he sees an alien nearby. When the alien attacks him, he is wounded, and Marcus cannot stifle a scream. The alien then attacks the truck, and Lee prepares to distract the alien to save his children. Lee signs to Regan that he has always loved her and proceeds to yell to draw the alien's attention. Marcus and Regan safely coast the truck back to the house. Reuniting with a grieving Evelyn, they make their way back into the house, followed by an alien. Regan's hearing aid again misfires, causing the alien to react, and Regan, now realizing its reaction to the high-pitched noise from her implant, places it on a microphone which amplifies the noise. The alien screeches in pain and involuntarily exposes the vulnerable tissue beneath the armor plating on its head, allowing Evelyn to kill it with Lee's pump shotgun. Armed with high-pitched sound as new weapon, the family prepares to defend themselves from the approaching pack of aliens who heard the shot. In the final scene, Evelyn is seen defiantly racking the shotgun, putting a live shell in the chamber. Scott Beck and Brian Woods began writing A Quiet Place in January 2016 based on a concept they conceived in college. When they first spoke with Platinum Dunes about the project, the two said they wanted Emily Blunt for the role of the mother. Platinum Dunes' Michael Bay had a first-look deal with Paramount Pictures and showed their script to the studio. During the writing stage, Beck and Woods spoke to a Paramount executive, who suggested that the film could be a crossover with the Cloverfield franchise. When they took their final script to Paramount, the studio embraced it as a distinct, standalone story. Paramount bought the script from the duo. Platinum Dunes producers Andrew Form and Brad Fuller sent the script to John Krasinski to play the role of the father, which he read in July. The concept of parents protecting their children appealed to him, especially as his second child with Blunt had recently been born. Beck and Woods also cited Bong Joon-ho's The Host, 2006, as a significant influence on their screenplay for the film. After reading Beck and Woods' script, Krasinski pitched his vision of the story to Blunt, who suggested he direct the film. In a meeting with the producers, Krasinski expressed his desire to co-write and direct it and pitched them his vision. When he co-wrote the script, he had Blunt in mind for the role. However, he did not ask her to do it as she had just had a child, was working on another film, and he was concerned that if he asked she would either decline it or accept it to support him. I just thought if she does this, she has to come to it on her own. Blunt initially did not want to be cast, but after reading Krasinski's script on a flight she felt she needed to do it as the story represented some of my deepest fears of not being able to protect my children. Beck and Woods said that Krasinski taking over the film as director wasn't about reshaping it in any massive way and that he really protected our vision of the script. Krasinski said that their script differed from his in a bunch of little ways, but the heart was all theirs. They really had this thing that I wanted to be a part of. He focused on the idea of family being the core of the story, so every scare has to be because you love this family, every detail has to become a detail that says something about this family, not just to be cool, not just to be scary. His contributions to the screenplay included the use of sign language, sand paths, the lights, and the walk to the forest and the pharmacy. Krasinski was initially anxious about having very little dialogue to work with, as he was concerned with how to keep people interested. He then realized that minimal dialogue became the film's superpower. The use of sign language came about when, prior to filming, Simmonds showed Krasinski the American Sign Language translation for a scene's dialogue, and he found her gestures to be so much more cinematic than saying the words would have been. Blunt contributed to the pre-production stage of the film. Most of the directing Krasinski did with her role was off-screen from the moment she accepted the project. The two worked through the script and discussed the shots for the film before it went into production, and by the time they got on set they had done all the collaborating, all the hard work. Blunt offered up the greatest ideas for the film, he stated, crediting her for raising the game for him as a filmmaker. In March 2017, Krasinski was announced as director and co-writer of the film, co-starring with Blunt. The film is his third directorial credit and his first for a major studio. The film was produced on a budget of $17 million. The film was shot in 36 days. Production took place from May to November 2017 in Dutchess and Ulster counties in upstate New York. Filmmakers spent their budget locally, including a purchase of 20 tons of corn, which they hired local farmers to grow. Some filming took place on a sound stage in the town of Pauling in Dutchess County, as well as on location in the county's city of Beacon. Filming also took place on the Wallkill Valley Rail Trail in New Paltz of Ulster County, using the Springtown Truss Bridge. Outside Dutchess and Ulster counties, filming took place on Main Street in Little Falls in Herkimer County, New York. During filming, the crew avoided making noise so diegetic synchronized sounds, example the sound of rolling dice on a game board, could be recorded. The sounds were amplified in post-production. A musical score was added, which Krasinski justified in wanting audiences to have a cinematic experience and some familiarity with the traditional film component, instead of feeling like they're part of a silence experiment. Some music was cut from the film, which Krasinski found more impactful than having the score dominate scenes. Supervising sound editors Eric Eddahl and Ethan van der Ryn worked on A Quiet Place. For scenes from the perspective of the deaf daughter, sound was removed to put greater focus on the visual. They also advised on organizing shots to reflect the creature's perspective, like showing them noticing a sound, then showing what was causing the sound. Composer Marco Beltrami provided the sound editor's music to work with in a way that would not interfere with the sound design throughout the film. In the film, creatures are blind and communicate through clicking sounds. Eddahl and van der Ryn said they were inspired by animal echolocation, such as that employed by bats. The sound of feedback, normally avoided by sound editors, was woven into the story at a loudness level that would not bother audiences too much. For moments in the movie that depict Regan's point of view, Simmonds worked with sound designers to convey what the cochlear implants in the movie would have sounded like, and what she was able to hear without the implants. The characters communicate in American Sign Language, ASL, to avoid making sound, so the filmmakers hired deaf mentor Douglas Ridloff to teach ASL to the actors and to be available to make corrections. They also hired an ASL interpreter for deaf actress Simmonds, so that spoken and signed language could be interpreted back and forth on set. Simmonds grew up with ASL, and she helped teach her fellow actors to sign. She said, "In the movie, we've been signing together for years and years. So it should look fluent." She observed that each character's use of sign language reflected their motivations. The father had short and brief signs which showed his survival mentality, while the mother had more expressive signs as part of wanting her children to experience more than survival. Krasinski said that Simmonds' character used signing that's very defiant, it's very teenage defiant. Simmonds said that she suggested for the daughter to rebel rather than cower during a sign language fight with her father. She also said that the script originally had the father sign "I love you" to his daughter at the end of the film, but she suggested for him to follow with "I've always loved you" to make up for their arguing earlier in the film. Producers Andrew Form and Bradley Fuller said that they initially planned not to provide on-screen subtitles for sign language dialogue while providing only context clues, but they realized that subtitles were necessary for the scene in which the deaf daughter and her hearing father argue about the modified hearing aid. They subsequently added subtitles for all sign language dialogue in the film. Production designer Jeffrey Beecroft headed the creature design, and Industrial Light and Magic created the creatures, led by visual effects supervisor Scott Farrar. The director wanted the creatures to look like they had evolved to no longer need eyes, and to be somewhat humanoid in nature. Farrar said the initial creature design showed them with rhinoceros-like horns out of their faces, but later redesigns omitted this because it was not scary enough. Creature designers referenced prehistoric fish, black snakes, and bats, particularly their movement patterns. Inspiration was also drawn from bog people, cadavers that have been mummified in peat, turning the skin black and giving it a sagging, leathery look. Krasinski provided motion capture for the creatures. Paramount Pictures released the first trailer for A Quiet Place in November 2017. It aired a 30-second commercial for the film during the U.S. Football Championship Super Bowl 52 on February 4, 2018. Of the 7 trailers that aired during the playoff, A Quiet Place and Red Sparrow were shown during the pregame and had the lowest views and social conversations. A Quiet Place had 149,000 views on YouTube, 275,000 views on Facebook, and 2,900 social conversations. On February 12, 2018, Krasinski appeared on the Ellen DeGeneres Show to present the full trailer for A Quiet Place. The studio spent an estimated $86 million on prints and advertisements for the film. A Quiet Place had its world premiere at the South by Southwest Film Festival as the opening night film on March 9, 2018. It was selected from 2,458 submissions, and earned raves from critics, according to IndieWire. Following its premiere, the film experienced social media growth to over 52 million views across multiple platforms, outpacing Get Out, 2017, which had 46.9 million views. The tracking board reported on March 14, the stellar reviews out of South by Southwest, coupled with the fact that there isn't anything like it in the marketplace, should help it stand out among its bigger budget competition. Deadline. Hollywood said on March 15 that the film was projected to gross around $20 million in its opening weekend. Variety reported on March 27 that the film is tracking to open between $16 million and $30 million, which reached a basement of low $20 million by the week of its release. Box Office initially estimated on February 9, 2018, that A Quiet Place would gross $17 million in its opening weekend, and that it would gross a total of $60 million in the United States. By March 30, it increased its estimate to an opening weekend gross of $27.5 million and a U.S. total gross of $85 million. The magazine said the film's trailer was well received online and that it appeared frequently in previews for Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Box Office wrote, "The horror genre has also shown a knack for overperforming against expectations at the box office in recent years, setting this release up for potential success." It added that A Quiet Place would have to compete against another horror film, Truth or Dare, which would be released the following weekend. The magazine's staff drew very favorable comparisons between A Quiet Place and the 2016 films 10, Cloverfield Lane and Don't Breathe. A Quiet Place was first commercially released in theaters in the first week of April 2018 in multiple territories, including North America. The film grossed $188 million in the United States and Canada, and $152 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $341 million. Deadline Hollywood estimates the net profit of the film to be $93 million, when factoring together all expenses and revenues. Paramount Pictures released the film in 3,508 theaters in the United States and Canada on April 6, 2018, alongside Blockers, Chappaquiddick, and The Miracle Season. The film made $18.9 million on its first day, including $4.3 million from Thursday night previews at 2,750 theaters, increasing weekend projections to $47 million. Unlike most horror films, which are front-loaded on Friday and experience drops the rest of the weekend, A Quiet Place made $19.1 million on Saturday. It went on to debut to $50.2 million, topping the box office and marking the biggest opening for a Paramount film since Star Trek Beyond in July 2016. The film made $32.9 million in its second weekend, dropping 34%, better than the 50+% that horror films normally see, and finishing second at the box office, behind newcomer Rampage, $35.7 million. The hold represented the second best ever second weekend for a scary movie behind it. The film regained the top spot the following week, grossing $20.9 million, a 36% drop, but dropped back down to second place the following weekend behind newcomer Avengers: Infinity War with $10.7 million. Through its first 2 weeks of international release, the film had made $51.7 million, with its top markets being the United Kingdom, $9.2 million, Mexico, $5.1 million, Australia, $4.6 million, Brazil, $3.9 million, Indonesia, $3.4 million, the Philippines, $2.7 million, and Taiwan, $1.9 million. It also debuted to $2.2 million in Russia, the biggest ever opening for a Paramount horror film in the country. In its third weekend overseas, it dipped only 37% for a total of $15 million from 57 markets. In its fourth weekend in international markets, it grossed $6.6 million. As of May 20, 2018, the film's largest markets were United Kingdom, $16.3 million, Australia, $9.3 million, Mexico, $7.5 million, and Brazil, $6.9 million. The film was released in China on May 18 and made $17.7 million from 8,731 screens in its opening weekend. On review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, A Quiet Place holds an approval rating of 96% based on 387 reviews, and an average rating of 8.2/10. The website's critical consensus reads, "A Quiet Place artfully plays on elemental fears with a ruthlessly intelligent creature feature that's as original as it is scary, and establishes director John Krasinski as a rising talent." On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 82 out of 100, based on 55 critics, indicating universal acclaim. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A+ to F scale, while post-track reported filmgoers gave it an 81% overall positive score and a 63% definite recommend. Writing for Rolling Stone, Peter Travers gave the film 3.5 out of 4, praising the movie's exploration of themes about parenthood, and saying this new horror classic will fry your nerves to a frazzle. Variety's Owen Gleiberman said, "A Quiet Place is a tautly original genre-bending exercise, technically sleek and accomplished, with some vivid, scary moments, though it's a little too in love with the stoned logic of its own premise." Michael Phillips of the Chicago Tribune gave the film 2.5 out of 4 and said, "My favorite moment, an encounter between Reagan and one of the monsters in a cornfield, plays with sound and image and tension, creatively. Other bits are more shameless. I don't know if I'd call A Quiet Place enjoyable, it's more grueling than cathartic." Author Stephen King praised the film in a tweet, saying, "A Quiet Place is an extraordinary piece of work. Terrific acting, but the main thing is the silence, and how it makes the camera's eye open wide in a way few movies manage." Nick Allen of RogerEbert.com called A Quiet Place Krasinski's breakthrough as a triple threat entertainer, but it's been a long time coming. By no accident, he's tackled the horror genre while relying on the unique strength that can be seen throughout his acting work, and one that has made him relatable as an everyman across TV and film expressive silence. Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian says, "In its simplicity and punch, this is a film that feels as if it could have been made decades ago, in the classic age of Planet of the Apes or The Omega Man. It is a cracking back-to-basics thriller that does not depend too much on what these creatures look like." Matthew Monagle of Film School Rejects said A Quiet Place seemed to be the early front-runner for the sparsely intellectual horror movie of the year. Like previous films The Babadook, 2014, and The Witch, 2015. Monagle said Krasinski, who had directed 2 previous films, was making an unusual pivot into a genre typically reserved for newcomers, and considered it to be part of a movement toward horror films layered in storytelling, with character beats not typically found in a horror movie. Tatiana Tenrero, writing for Bustle, said while A Quiet Place was not a silent film, it is the first of its kind within the modern horror genre for how little spoken dialogue it actually has. She said the rare moments of spoken dialogue give depth to this horror movie, showing how the narrative defies the genre's traditional films even further. Krasinski identified the primary theme of the film as a dramatization of fears associated with modern parenthood. Krasinski, who had recently become a father, said in a conference interview that he was already in a state of terror about whether or not was a good enough father, and added that the meaning of parenthood had been elevated for him by imagining being a father in a nightmare world, struggling to simply keep his children alive. Krasinski has told CBS News that the scares were secondary to how powerful this could be as an allegory or metaphor for parenthood. For me, this is all about parenthood. Traverse Rolling Stone review argued that the question Krasinski tackles is what defines a family and what's needed to preserve it. Who are we, asks Mom, if we can't protect our children? The answers are worked out with satisfying complexity and genuine feeling, proving indeed that home is where family is. The Hollywood Reporter's John DeFore described the film as a terrifying thriller with a surprisingly warm heart and said, "You might have to go back to Jeff Nichols' 2011 Take Shelter to find a film that has used the fantastic this well to convey the combination of fear and responsibility a good parent feels." Speaking of the political and social commentary the film encouraged, Krasinski said, "That's not what I was going for, but the best compliment you can get on any movie is that it starts a conversation. The fact that people are leaving and talking about anything is really fun, but certainly about deep stuff like that, is awesome." Krasinski, who did not grow up with horror films, said that prior films of the genre such as Don't Breathe, 2016, and Get Out, 2017, that had societal commentary were part of his research. In addition to considering his film a metaphor for parenthood, he compared the premise to US politics in 2018. "I think in our political situation, that's what's going on now. You can close your eyes and stick your head in the sand, or you can try to participate in whatever's going on." He cited Jaws, 1975, as an influence, with how the protagonist police officer moved from New York to an island to avoid frightening situations, and was forced to encounter one in his new location with shark attacks. Roman Catholic Bishop Robert Barron was surprised by what he saw as strikingly religious themes in the film. He likened the family's primitive, agrarian life of silence to monasticism, and commends their self-giving love. Barron suggested pro-life themes, especially in the choices of the parents, as Mrs. Abbott risks everything to give birth to a child, and her husband lays down his own life so that the children can live, what Barron sees as the ultimate expression of parental love. Sonny Bunch of the Washington Post also commented and expanded on a pro-life message. Richard Brody, writing for The New Yorker, criticized A Quiet Place for what he perceived to be the inclusion of conservative and pro-gun themes in the film. He described it as the antithesis of Get Out and both apparently unconscious and conspicuously regressive, and opined that it brings to the fore the idealistic elements of gun culture while dramatizing the tragic implications that inevitably shadow that idealism. Krasinski addressed Brody's criticism in a subsequent interview with Esquire, stating that he did not write the film with an intentional political message. Krasinski said, "I never saw it that way or ever thought of it until it was presented to me in that way. Wasn't about being, you know, silent and political. My whole metaphor was solely about parenthood. In a life that's purposely kept silent, a world perpetually underscored by nothing more than soft huffs of breeze through the tree boughs and the whispers of bare feet on sand, the slightest blunder can sound cacophonous. In this quiet place, a fumbled board game piece rings out like a gunshot. A toppled kerosene lamp roars like a detonation. This new era of enforced silence commenced a few months ago, when the ever-hearing creatures first appeared. They're nearly indestructible in their armored, insectal form. And they're fast as a whip crack in their vicious attacks. The best the few human survivors can discern is that the alien things are totally blind. But they can hear more keenly than anything else known to man. A dropped object or raised voice will bring them screaming through the cornfields and forests from a mile away. However, Lee Abbott, his wife Evelyn, and their two kids, Reagan and Marcus, have managed. True, they've endured terrible losses. But they've learned to make their lives as totally and utterly quiet as is feasibly possible. They've insulated everything they use. They poured out long trails of footstep muffling sand. They speak only in sign language. They send long-distance messages through strings of light bulbs and small fires on the highest points possible. This is mankind's new reality. And as a family, the Abbotts are ready to live it for as long as necessary. The only problem is that Evelyn is now very pregnant. And babies aren't exactly the quiet types. The Abbotts' emotions have been intensified by the constant threat surrounding them. They love each other fiercely. And that deep affection drives them to work hard to protect one another. Who are we, if we can't protect them? Evelyn asks her husband in a moment of great peril. And in that light, both parents are ready and willing to put their lives on the line for their kids. Reagan and Marcus mirror that self-sacrificial attitude as well. For teen Reagan, however, her ratcheted-up emotions also cause her to believe that her father hates her for a choice she made that contributed to a tragic loss in the family. But Lee later makes it clear that his love for her has never wavered. The origins of the invading alien creatures are never explained, but they are definitely otherworldly monsters. It's implied that just 3 of the deadly beasties have killed nearly everyone in the town and countryside near the Abbotts' farm. The threat of their dangerous presence is constant. The creatures' talon-tipped attacks rip and rend everything from furniture and walls to the metal exteriors of vehicles and farm buildings. We see the beasts slash out with their angled, arachnid-like limbs on numerous occasions. In one case, a small child is snatched up in a flash. Other times, human victims are struck or flung aside like rag dolls. We never see an actual flesh-rending strike, but we do see the bloody aftermath in a couple cases. A screeching raccoon is struck, leaving behind a smear of gore, for instance. An elderly woman is left for dead, her clothing torn and bloodied. Someone steps on an exposed nail on a staircase. We then see her slowly pull her skewered foot off the metal spike and limp around, leaving bloody footprints in her wake. Someone also falls into a grain silo and sinks down under the suffocating corn. Evelyn's blood pools in a bathtub as she begins to give birth. She leaves a bloody handprint on a glass shower door. We also see a creature blasted with a shotgun and left dead in a pool of its own blood-like fluids. Like many a sci-fi and horror film before it, it's easy to see A Quiet Place through an allegorical lens. We live in a world bursting with threats both real and exaggerated, nearby and far away that daily remind us how deadly our world can be. A Quiet Place builds its narrative upon that sense of brooding tension and unceasing anxiety. But even if metaphors and allegories aren't your cup of tea, there are other elements worth appreciating in this completely gripping pick. A Quiet Place is a stark tale of fighting for survival in the face of a horrific, insidious threat. Through the family at its core, their fears, self-sacrifice and silent but terrified communication, the story draws us in and keeps us on the edge of our seats from the opening title to the closing credits. Star and director John Krasinski, along with his real-life wife, who also plays his on-screen spouse here, masterfully ratchet up the slow drip tension, bit by bit. What happens along the way can sometimes be as shocking as it is soundless. Now, that's not to suggest that there aren't any negatives to call out here. Though the most horrible visuals lurk just outside our view, heart-pounding peril and hair-trending loss, some of it accompanied by after-the-fact images of bloodshed, definitely warrant leaving the youngsters at home with a sitter. For the rest of us, though, A Quiet Place's first-rate filmmaking panache and moments of intense familial love and sacrifice can turn a quiet night at home with nothing to do, into a disquieting cinematic consideration of the stuff we value most. Working up the confidence to finally see A Quiet Place was no easy task. Firstly, I wanted to find the right time to see the film where it would be a minimal and respectful audience due to the silent nature of the film. Secondly, I'm a genuine coward at seeing horror films in the cinema, as I can't pause it when it gets too intense for a tea break. I've explained many times before that I have a weird relationship with horror films. It's a genre that has generally disappointed me due to the abundance of low-effort, poorly written films, but I'll always come crawling back. When a horror is done well, then it's well worth the wait, and the abundance of high-concept, well-executed horror films in recent years is a very exciting prospect. Clocking in at 90 minutes, A Quiet Place has some of the best use of pacing I've seen on the big screen. Not 1 second of this film is wasted, with every look, shot, and music cue expertly laying out the narrative without the need for dialogue. Krasinski masterfully communicates the film across with barely a spoken word throughout. The level of detail in every shot really sells this bleak apocalypse, as the characters effectively soundproof their lives. On a technical level, A Quiet Place is one of the most impressive of recent memory. The film shares an interesting similarity with last year's Academy Award-nominated hit, Get Out. Both have directors coming from a comedy background tackling the horror genre with a high-concept approach to the genre. Another film I was reminded of was It Comes at Night. Both begin with a family tragedy and have families in an isolated setting guided by a strict set of rules to survive, although A Quiet Place actually has something come at night. There are a few niggling issues which are just nitpicking, but due to the standard this film sets, it's hard to ignore. The creature's degree of hearing is never really outlined, leading to some pretty inconsistent logic on what they can and can't hear and from what distance. While I have full praise for the world building and the attention to detail, it's also hard to ignore other details such as the family's access to electricity, which is probably sourced from a generator, not the quietest of devices, and the use of an old creaky silo as a lookout. Again, these are only minor drawbacks to an excellent film. A Quiet Place was a fantastic cinematic experience, largely due to the virtually empty screening I had, but the few patrons in attendance were just as enthralled and unnerved as I was. It's an overwhelmingly intense film that had me on the edge of my seat throughout and putting my hands over my ears. The inner hipster in me would have loved for a complete absence of music though, as the sound design and moments of deafening silence were fantastic. There were 2 instances of me violently sprinting through VU cinemas in April, the sort of short sprint that makes you breathe funnily and leads to people making weird eye contact with you in the lobby when you return abruptly to a walking pace. This film caused one of them. The other instance was me not wanting to miss a second more of Infinity War. A hand-trembling need for a piss during this film at a pivotal, scary, and silent moment lead to me walking down an unnecessarily dark corridor connecting the screen to the outside world and absolutely losing all rational sense of how much danger I was in, and bursting into a run. I was so engrossed in the silent, tense world of A Quiet Place that I was convinced something was going to jump out and eat me, or whatever the creatures did. I watched most of it through my hands when they showed up, so I still don't know. I love a film that goes the extra length to ensure accuracy, and John Krasinski pushing to use an actress who is deaf in real life really had me excited to see what other attention to detail and meticulous care would be paid to ensure a solid film experience. Every scene has some sort of clever, well-worn feature to it that shows just how much world building this family has had to do since the deathpocalypse started and sound became a death sentence. Even from the first scene, and Jesus Christ does this film open heavy, the tone of tension, fear, but a strange sort of resilient acceptance is set. No exposition lines needed, or possible, and the background images and solid acting give you all the info you need. Sure, if we want to nitpick, we can say that the clues dropped along the way are a little on the nose, a series of useful, but upon proper reflection, clunky facts are sprawled on his little research whiteboards, but I would rather a small decision like that to keep the integrity of the film strong than boring useless filler to catch me up. An entire medium of storytelling has essentially been removed in this film, we've dropped a sense, and that could have gone really bad for them. But it's done so well, and with so much care that it not only gives you an incredibly concise introduction to this world but forces you to explore the entire frame in every scene and pick up on information you would otherwise miss if there was this forced and lazy exposition scene played out. Normally in survival films, we need a newcomer to join an already established survivor tribe as the newbie whose only function is to be your ears as a viewer so they can make mistakes and further the plot, and that's passive. A Quiet Place doesn't need lazy narration. You're trapped in your seat watching the super prepared family simply have their shit absolutely fall apart and you have to quietly deal with the consequences with them. A Quiet Place marks writer/director/actor John Krasinski's first deep dive into the horror genre, and what a truly marvelous way to announce his arrival with this wholly original modern horror triumph. The film follows a family who are forced to survive in complete silence as the world is plagued with creatures who hunt by sound. From the opening scene right until the final second I was on the edge of my seat sweating, in awe, and absolutely terrified. The film plays with fear incredibly well and does not give you a single chance to breathe, with a petrifying atmosphere so relentlessly intense it will undoubtedly leave you breathless. Horror films tend to fall apart in two specific areas: the execution of the scares, and the representation and development of the characters. Here, not only is the horror utterly nerve-wracking, but the characters are so strong and the family dynamic is presented so well that it creates a vested interest in each person and a strong desire to see them get out of this predicament. There is not a moment of downtime, and even when there isn't an on-screen threat, the looming presence is never lost. The originality of this film is built entirely around the use of sound and silence to bring about a sense of constant dread and scares that break convention at every opportunity. The sound design is absolutely impeccable and, dare I say, a lock for an Oscar nomination at the very least. The absence of sound is just as crucial here as the use of atmospheric sounds such as the creaks of wood, wind, and breathing that make up the majority of what you hear. The way you experience the sounds in this film is orchestrated to place you in the shoes of the character you are following so you can feel the sheer terror they are experiencing. This approach is so effective that the packed theater I was in is the quietest I have been a part of in a long time. Even when the sound completely dropped out, no one uttered a single word and you could hear a pin drop. Almost as if by placing everyone in the shoes of this family it coerced them to remain just as silent as them. One thing A Quiet Place exhibits strongly is the power and importance of silence in film, something it explores extensively through Millicent Simmonds' character Regan, who is deaf. Something truly brilliant is done with her character, where whenever the camera focuses closely on Millicent you get to experience the surrounding environment from her perspective, which is where the sound completely drops out. This is a technique which was used in Millicent's previous film Wonderstruck, 2017, a film I loved for a number of reasons, including how all of her scenes are presented through her ears. This detail is woven into the film brilliantly, from the plot itself all the way to contributing to some of the haunting atmospheric horror. This movie locks you in early and puts you through the ringer, making this tight hour and 30-minute experience feel more like a harrowing 2.5 hours. As I mentioned before, it doesn't let up even for a second to allow you a chance to gather yourself after just having the shit scared out of you. Another element of the film that Krasinski executes to near perfection is the presence of heart, something rarely seen and even more rarely well presented in the horror genre. Amongst all of the constant terror is a tremendous yet calculated amount of heart and raw emotion, adding to the strength and development of the characters and their relationships. These character-centric moments are so important in building up these characters, and not 1 second is gone to waste. Each of the performances in here are riveting and they all bring something unique to the film and sell the dire circumstances phenomenally. Emily Blunt and John Krasinski are enthralling for every moment they are on screen and deliver the joyous and heartache-driven emotion amazingly. They both have such grounded performances that you believe wholeheartedly that people who are experienced and know what they're doing, yet fear still drives them deep down. I adored Millicent Simmonds in her debut role in last year's Wonderstruck, but with this performance there isn't the slightest chance I'll ever forget her name. Being a deaf actor, I was excited last year to see where her career will take her, and now I am all in on seeing her in more films going forward. There is one character in here who is still backed by a good performance and has some strong moments but is noticeably less memorable than everyone else. I'm talking about the son, Marcus, played by the young Noah Jupe, who doesn't quite make as large of an impact as the rest of the family members. He still has a lot to do in this story and does it well, but I just didn't gravitate towards his character like I did the others. So in the end, as a massive fan of the horror genre when executed correctly and especially when backed by original ideas, I cannot express enough how much I loved being relentlessly terrified by this movie. John Krasinski's directing is a triumph, and for his first venture into the world of horror he shows a lot of natural talent in turning a simple premise into a constantly engaging feature film. The way horror is derived from the clever use of sound in this film is incredible and creates a ton of tense moments that will have you hooked. This joins the ranks as one of the best horror films in recent years and should not be missed. In the summer of 2024, I had a life-changing opportunity to be fully funded to study and live in South Korea for 2 months. During the first 2 weeks of the program, we were in a hotel in Busan, and half of us had roommates while the other half didn't. I felt so well rested when I was in this hotel, but after those 2 weeks were up, we switched roles and moved into the Busan National University dorms. I had a roommate, who I love and cherish. She's great. But in the beginning, as someone who hasn't been in a dorm in 5 years, I was having an adjustment period. While I was in the hotel I would unwind by watching television and Netflix, and in the room I felt kind of weird about doing it. That said, one day I really wanted to unwind, so I went to the local PC Bang with some friends. For those of you who are unaware of this concept, it's basically paying $2.50 USD to have 2 hours of access to a computer room in Korea. They have food, which is solid and cheap, and there are students everywhere cussing people out while playing online games. What did I do in here? I put my headphones on and watched Netflix. The screens were huge, so it made it perfect for watching movies. And this was how I ended up watching A Quiet Place. Let's get into the review, shall we? The premise behind this movie is that in a period prior to the events of the movie, aliens have invaded Earth. These aliens cannot see, so they rely on their hearing to kill off the humans. By the time this film begins, most of the humans have been killed, leaving one family, the Abbotts, to try and live a life in silence on their farm. The Abbott family consists of Evelyn and Lee, the parents, a deaf daughter named Reagan, and 2 sons named Bo and Marcus. An inciting incident occurs early on in the film. The family goes into a town to stock up on what they need, and Bo finds a toy space shuttle. However, it makes noise when it is turned on, so Lee forces him to leave it behind. Reagan gives it back to him, and Bo swipes the batteries before anyone notices. It's when they're walking back home that he turns the toy on, and the family is horrified to watch Bo die because of a nearby alien. This crushes Reagan, who thinks it's her fault, and no one except her brother realizes how sad she is about it. A year passes, and Evelyn is pregnant again. While the family is out fishing, and Reagan visiting her brother's grave, Evelyn's water breaks and she goes into labor. She ventures towards the basement in pain, but steps on a nail in the process, making a photo frame fall to the floor and making noise. An alien hears this and comes into the home, and Evelyn tries to go into the basement while keeping in her sounds of pain. The alien comes into the basement, but she escapes with an egg timer being rigged, and Marcus and Lee come home and lure the angel out of their home. She gives birth as Reagan comes home from the grave. But when the baby gives off a cry, another alien comes into the barn they started hiding in. The alien doesn't find them, but it breaks a water pipe. Evelyn wakes up with the flooding and is forced to hide behind the cascading water to hide the sound of her with the baby. The 2 older siblings are lighting a fire to let other farms know, but Marcus slips into a silo, the sound attracting the alien. Regan's in-ear implants make a shrieking noise, which is what saves them. The alien broke a hole as it fled, allowing Marcus to get out. They reunite with their father, but he is injured, and Marcus screams when that happens. Lee then sacrifices himself after telling them he loves them, and the kids return back to the home. With Evelyn, they go into the basement, but the alien follows them. Reagan then puts the implant on a microphone, which forces the alien to expose a weakness, a little bit of tissue underneath its armor plating. Evelyn shoots it there, killing the alien, but the noise attracts even more angels. I thought this was a solid movie overall. I love silent movies from the early 1900s, so I wasn't bothered by the fact there wasn't really any talking. In fact, I think we need more silent movies in general nowadays. I'll check out the sequel and prequel of the movie eventually, but also something to note is that you have to show some talent as an actor if you have to not use your voice. That's why a lot of silent film actors couldn't transfer into the talkie era, or vice versa. You have to portray emotion in a very specific way. All in all, I say watch this if you haven't already. It was an interesting story to watch this in a PC bang too, and I'll be writing about the other movie I watched in there soon. For unspecified reasons, in the year 2020 humanity has all been but wiped from existence on planet Earth. Little is known about the specific events that led to the near extinction of the human race, other than that a group of mysterious alien creatures who are blind, with a strong armor and very enhanced hearing, prowl the earth looking for opportunities to devour the remaining human survivors. In other words, survival lies in silence. For the Abbott family, this has become the norm. They communicate via sign language. They cover their floor and pathways to town in sand to avoid their footsteps from being heard. Their board game pieces are padded. Not a whisper, not a sound, not a rustle can be made for fear of being hunted. For the most part, the family has done well at avoiding undue attention. But time has a way of wearing down one's patience. Let's be honest, eventually you slip up on a routine or become tired of it. Simple protocols and procedures tend to slip your mind, and for this family these slip-ups start happening all too often. The question becomes, how much longer will their presence remain unnoticed? A Quiet Place redefines terror on a brand new level. In the way Guillermo del Toro can scare many of his audiences with the occasional jump scare and uncertainty of the moment, e.g. Mama, The Orphan, etc., John Krasinski raises this tactic to the next level and, honestly, with this film, puts del Toro out to pasture with this technique. As other critics have mentioned, it is the silence that is the most deafening. It is the silence that serves as that creepy soundtrack you hear in a movie warning you of the horror that is to come, and that is the beauty of this film, the silence. The silence that invites the audience to become part of the film, rather than a passive viewer. The silence that makes you question your sanity and what you are watching, and where, as others have mentioned, you may begin to actually talk to the characters on screen. This what defines a true horror film. I also commend Krasinski for not only directing the film, but taking the lead role as well. In this particular film, having Krasinski as both the director and as the father, Lee, is a strength, especially in his interactions with his co-star, his real-life wife, Emily Blunt, who plays his wife Evelyn. The performances from the entire family are incredible. An unspoken performance can be just as powerful and riveting as a spoken performance, and the chemistry between each of the characters is spot on. Each brings something of value to the story, and every character is allowed some moments of true development. The pacing is also fairly strong. I'm not a fan of horror, mostly because I get scared very easily. The last time I watched a horror movie, sandwiched between my brother and my husband, both of who decided not to let me budge, was a big disaster for me, entertainment for them. So you can understand why I've always been skeptical about horror movies. But when my husband said he wanted to watch A Quiet Place, directed by John Krasinski and starring him and Emily Blunt, I reluctantly agreed, but mostly because I have a tiny girl crush on the lady. A Quiet Place is set in a world where you must remain silent, or face an end, thanks to blind extraterrestrial creatures. The tagline for the movie is, "If they hear you, they hunt you." Lee Abbott, John Krasinski, and Evelyn Abbott, Emily Blunt, along with their children, Reagan, who is deaf, Marcus, and Bo, look for supplies while using sign language, because of the no sound rule. Bo is killed by a creature, no thanks to a toy airplane. Fast forward a year, and the Abbott family is living on their farm, trying to survive through each day. How they curb the sounds, and how they make sure they aren't caught forms the rest of the story. I knew John Krasinski was a funny guy, but the depth he has shown in this film, both as a director and an actor, is mind-blowing. Creativity has no limits, they say, and this is true of this film. And thanks to the screenplay by Krasinski, Scott Beck, and Brian Woods, silence gets a new level of importance through this movie. It shows you that you don't need words to prove your love for your loved ones. The actor who absolutely takes the cake is Emily Blunt. She is raw, emotional, and motherhood personified. Given, Krasinski is almost as good as her, but that's the point. Almost. Blunt is exceptional as she sobs, jumps in front of her children to save them, grieves, is afraid. Every little action seems like a masterpiece in itself. The last 15 minutes are full of absolute emotion. I wasn't surprised to find tears rolling down my face as my heart broke in two. In one particular scene, Krasinski outshines Blunt. And his guttural scream will haunt me for a long time to come. Though I'd gone into A Quiet Place thinking it's a horror film because that's what it's supposed to be, apparently, I found it more on the lines of an extremely gripping suspense thriller. Dystopia scares me, and this movie was exactly that. What if something like this happens in the future? With our intelligence and what we are doing to the planet, I don't think it will be long before creatures like the Death Angels will make our Earth into a quiet place. You must gather all your strength if you're going to watch A Quiet Place. You'll need it because the movie scares you with its soundless storyline. There are no empty jump scares. Everything in there happens for a reason and has a consequence. The no sound rule for survival in there seeps out and embeds itself into your head, making you think that you have to stay silent or something is going to sprint through the walls and eat your head off. It's that effective. With a combination of a taut screenplay, crisp direction, and brilliant acting, A Quiet Place deserves all the applause it can get. John Krasinski, in particular, thanks to the multiple roles he has taken up for this project. Every second holds your attention, and makes you hold your breath. And that is not an easy task to do. So when I say that you should go watch this horror movie, go watch it. Because if I can sit through it, so can you. And the list of reasons I mentioned above will make sure that you fall in love with the movie. Emily Blunt in particular, but also John Krasinski. What an incredible couple. John Krasinski's A Quiet Place is a nerve shredder. It's a movie designed to make you an active participant in a game of tension, not just a passive observer in an unfolding horror. Most of the great horror movies are so because we become actively invested in the fate of the characters and involved in the cinematic exercise playing out before us. It is a tight thrill ride, the kind of movie that quickens the heart rate and plays with the expectations of the audience, while never treating them like idiots. In other words, it's a really good horror movie. With his script, co-written by Brian Woods and Scott Beck, Krasinski wastes no time. We see a family. Krasinski plays the unnamed father, his real-life wife Emily Blunt plays the mother, and Noah Jupe, Suburbicon, Millicent Simmonds, Wonderstruck, and Kate Woodward play their three children. The eldest, the girl, is deaf, as is the remarkable young actress who plays her. A title card says it's day 89, and we can tell we're in a recently post-apocalyptic world. The family very slowly on tiptoes moves around a small town store, taking some of the few remaining supplies and some prescription drugs for the older boy, who looks like he has the flu. They communicate in sign language and are incredibly careful not to make a sound, but the youngest boy draws a picture of a rocket on the floor. The thing that he signs will take them all away. We quickly discern that sound in this world is dangerous. And the danger is intensified in the following sequence as the youngest child finds a toy that makes noise and Things don't end well. The bulk of A Quiet Place takes place over a year later, as the family continues to grieve and the mother is about 38 weeks pregnant. Preparing for the arrival of a newborn baby in a world without noise is difficult, and the father continues to pore over newspaper articles and research, looking for a way to stop the creatures that kill at the slightest sound. Larger-than-life enemies that can detect their prey orally have been a part of great cinema for years, from the xenomorph hunting the crew of the Nostromo in Alien to the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park, and Krasinski knows that lineage. He's incredibly smart about the way he brings the viewer into this auditory game. He's regularly but not too regularly setting up what could be called auditory expectations. He'll show us a shotgun or an exposed nail in the floor or a timer in silence and we know full well what sounds those are likely to produce. Don't worry, Krasinski doesn't overplay it at all. There aren't rooms of wind chimes or broken glass. It's a very subtle, clever storytelling tool to build tension when a director and his co-screenwriters aren't allowed to use dialogue to do so, and it pulls us into this world in a way that's unexpected and incredibly enjoyable. It also helps that Krasinski displays a sense of composition and economic storytelling that he hasn't really before in other films. A Quiet Place is a no-nonsense, lean movie, the best kind when it comes to thrillers. It feels like every shot has been considered incredibly carefully as the film ticks like a clock on a bomb, perfectly balancing scares with scenes that set up the emotional stakes and the world of these characters. The film has a beautiful sense of geography, almost all of it taking place on a farm that Krasinski and his technical team lay out in a way that allows us to feel like we know it. This is not one of those films that mistakes shaky camera work for horror storytelling. It's got a refined visual language that plays beautifully with perspective and the terrifying nature of a world in which we can't yell to warn/find people or, in the case of the deaf daughter, hear what's coming. On that note, there's also, without spoiling anything, a strong, enabling message at the core of A Quiet Place. It's a film that's about empowerment more than sheltering, and it's that emotional hook that really elevates the final act. It helps a great deal that Krasinski completely sticks the landing. It has one of the best final shots in horror in years and, of course, it comes with a familiar auditory cue that had the audience here at South by Southwest cheering. With almost no dialogue, A Quiet Place relies a great deal on visual storytelling, but I'll admit that it also uses the crutches of composer Marco Beltrami's strings for jump scares a bit too much. It's total conjecture, but one can almost sense Platinum Dunes head Michael Bay insisting on those devices, and I'd love to see a version of A Quiet Place that's even sparser in terms of on-the-nose choices like sound scares and an overheated score. We live in such a noisy world that it's hard to imagine that constant sound being taken away. We use noise to express ourselves, it's a part of who we are as people. And A Quiet Place weaponizes that part of the human condition in a way that owes a debt to films like Alien but also charts its own new ground. So many great horror films are about people who have to adapt to survive, they have to challenge their own insecurities or preconceptions to make it through the night. In that sense, great horror films are often about empowerment, taking away that which some might perceive as weak. A Quiet Place shreds the nerves, but it does so in a way that feels rewarding. You don't just walk out having experienced a thrill ride, you walk out on a high, the kind of high that only comes from the best horror movies. I'd been looking forward to seeing John Krasinski in his horror film debut ever since I saw a trailer for it. What I didn't expect was to see it in theaters, mainly because I figured I wouldn't have the time. But alas, my girlfriend, me, and some other friends ended up in the theater on a Friday night, not really sure what to expect. I mean, let's be honest. The only reason I went to see the movie was Jim from The Office. If the movie was good, then that was a bonus. The premise was interesting, at least, while maybe not the most flashy of ideas. Almost as soon as the movie began, however, I could tell this was very well done, and every second-long frame was meticulously crafted. There are few movies where it feels like every scene, every image, is purposefully set up and shown, but this was one of those few. Anyways, onto the grading. So, Needless to say, these two are both very well known and successful when it comes to acting. Emily Blunt has made a name for herself, starring in various big-name movies, and recently showed up in the psychological thriller Girl on the Train, but read the book, not the movie. And John is Jim. And I won't stop calling him Jim, so deal with it. Also, they never gave him a name in the movie, that I can recall, so I choose to believe that his name was Jim. Anyways, they both showed off just how good they are in this film, both when acting with other people and when by themselves. Seeing as they're the only two adult main characters, they had a lot of pressure on their shoulders. I mean, having kid actors that are talented was awesome, but if these two didn't meet the bar we set for them, the movie was going to be thought of as a letdown, whereas any acting flaws by the younger ones could have been overshadowed by Emily Blunt and Jim. Not only could Emily Blunt and Jim act, and direct, in his case, but the two other main actors were fantastic as well, despite being younger and less experienced. I didn't recognize either of them from previous films, but that didn't stop them from being just as good as the adults. Through this great acting and marvelous writing, A Quiet Place is full of characters you root for. Most of the time, in horror movies, I actually want the good guys to die, just because I'm sick of every movie having a happy ending. This one, though, I really wanted Jim and co to somehow make it out alive. Since it seems like the rest of the world has already been overtaken by the monsters, I wasn't sure where exactly they could go, but still I held out hope. Much like the characters in the movie. The simple fact is, this movie was better in theaters than it could possibly have been at home. With their surround sound, blaring volume, and the large screen, it just felt like you were in that world. There were times in the movie where everything was so quiet, it was awkward to even take a drink, because it felt like everybody could hear everything you were doing. After 2 hours of sitting in the dark theater room, walking out to the main lobby where everybody could talk freely and make any noise they wanted was a shock. It felt unnatural. And for the next few days, I wondered how much needless noise there is in our world. I really enjoyed the music score for this film, and how it was placed thoughtfully to add tension, but not so much that it ruined the frightful atmosphere of quiet. There was just enough noise, and just enough silence, that it really made for a scary experience. The main thing I long for in a movie like this, where the entire Earth is in a post-apocalyptic state, would be more information about the rest of the planet. Are there survivors holed up in a city somewhere, or multiple cities? When did these creatures first come about? If they really do attack noise, how did everybody not die within the first few days, before people figured out what the cause was? We see hints of newspapers from all across the globe, detailing what they know about the creatures, with headlines such as "It's sound," and "Stay safe." Get underground, but never any real information. Are there people actually underground? Why didn't Jim and his family follow them? There is a scene, see picture above, where it's shown that there are other families in this countryside, maybe a dozen or so. Wouldn't it be better for them to band together and try to do something? This is one of the reasons why I liked Planet of the Apes so much. I didn't expect this movie to show everything that happened, but I would have liked some more details. After all, their entire world changed in the span of 89 days. I wanted to see that progression a little more. The ending is one that most people will like. It has that female cocking a gun with a determined expression moment, literally, where you think, dang, she's gonna go kill all these stupid monsters. It has the deaf girl making use of technology and figuring out that high-frequency waves can render these creatures crippled. So, yeah, it's cool. But it's disappointing. What I wanted was to either see them take out the creatures, and find a new, better life, or see them all die and understand that there was no way out of this situation. Instead, we got the ambiguous ending, which I am a fan of, just not in this case. For most of you, it might put a nice bow on the movie, but for me, it was like leaving out the last 3 chapters of a great book. This movie had only a few bad things about it, and the world building was really just me being picky. The ending, though, that keeps it from getting a better score. I loved the film, the concept, and appreciate the fact that Red Alert something interesting and unique was made in Hollywood, but then again, that's what the horror genre is best at. Staying unique, while the rest of the world makes the 28th Avengers movie. Correction, if you read my review of A Quiet Place 2, you'll see that many of my issues with this movie were resolved in that sequel. So I bumped up the score from 9 to a 9.5, because with that in mind, it deserves it. Let me back up. There's a running joke I've seen in reviews for A Quiet Place where people keep wondering if the resurrection of the horror genre lies in giving horror movies to TV comedy stars, seeing that John Krasinski directed A Quiet Place and that Jordan Peele directed Get Out. But I would also take this time to point out that Krasinski was an actor on The Office, the show that made him famous. Jordan Peele developed the skits he starred in on Key and Peele, with a few of those skits being horror-based, so it actually wasn't unreasonable that Peele could make a good movie. The fact it was an Academy Award-winning film was super surprising, but still, not completely out of the blue. The idea that the man who once played Jim Halpert on The Office directed A Quiet Place is something I still can't wrap my head around. To be fair, this is the third movie that Krasinski's has directed, but his previous two films were small indie dramas/comedies, not this. If you're going to have a gimmick, stick with it, and A Quiet Place commits hard to its scary as hell concept. The concept is that aliens have descended on Earth. No real details about the aliens that wiped out most of mankind are offered since the film's opening text is Day 89. The film isn't about how mankind fell, but how it's had to adapt to these monsters that stalk them. The aliens hunt entirely by sound, meaning out-of-place noises can literally get you killed. The film centers on a family made up of a father, John Krasinski, a mother, Emily Blunt, a daughter, Millicent Simmonds, and a son, Noah Jupe. The cast is extremely limited beyond these four performers, but they're all really damn good. The hardest part of talking about this movie is that it's such a beautifully lean concept that giving up too many details spoils a lot of the fun. I put the word fun in quotes because my head literally still hurts from the stress that accumulated right behind my eyes watching this whole thing unfold. With a concept like that, you'd hope the sound design is really on point, and it is. Every little, and big noise, will completely unnerve you for the film's entire runtime, but I just want to take a moment to talk about just how great this idea is on paper before it's even executed. Horror films usually tie jump scares to loud noises, or false jump scares to loud noises. It's the easiest and fastest way to get a momentary jolt out of the audience, and it's kind of a cheap way to do it. But if your premise relies on characters being extremely quiet and any noise of any volume happens, it's instantly terrifying. Even the false jump scares in A Quiet Place could lead to someone's death, and that's brilliant. Truth be told, there are only a couple of false jump scares in this movie and only one of them feels cheap. The rest present an immediate threat for the most part, and one that doesn't gets an immediate, and violent, payoff. The concept is kind of limiting and sounds like something you might see in a contemplative piece of horror, but A Quiet Place really is a monster movie at the end of the day. It does feature a lot of character building in the first act and day-to-day activities to flesh out the world, but the majority of the movie is the one bad night scenario that makes some of the best horror movies out there. And most of the activities serve to set up the rules and the space of the farm that the family lives on so that as an audience we understand the geography of the film. Once it gets into the one bad night, A Quiet Place refuses to stop. It becomes a relentless escalation of tension as characters make human mistakes, suffer bad luck, or have to deal with the inevitable toll of time. Emily Blunt's character is pregnant and when her water breaks. If you thought childbirth was stressful already, it's a lot scarier when a praying mantis xenomorph thing is coming up the stairs to check things out. It's the kind of sequence that feels like something David Cronenberg might have dreamed up if he'd made a straight monster movie back in the 1980s but had a slight PG-13 restriction to deal with. The PG-13 rating gets pushed pretty hard here, especially once the monsters descend on the farm. And man, these monsters are scary as hell. They slowly reveal the design throughout the movie, and while the design initially falls into the Grey Cloverfield-esque creature design that's dominated the modern monster movie, a particular quirk of the design sets it way apart. They're not as iconic as other modern monsters like the aliens of Attack the Block, but once the film reveals how these monsters here, it instantly evolves the design into something truly disgusting and kind of awesome. It's solid work that rises to the occasion. The monsters definitely give the movie a modern B-movie vibe, and I don't mean that in a bad way. This is a film that seems to understand some of its schlocky influences. The newspaper clippings throughout the movie have a straight-up 1950s vibe, declaring things like "they hunt by sound," stuff like that, but it's still completely engrossing. This is where the cast is really worth mentioning. I already said they're all damn good, but they feel like a real family. It helps that Emily Blunt and John Krasinski are married in real life, so their chemistry is completely believable. The kids are just as good, but the standout is Millicent Simmonds as the daughter. Simmonds' character is deaf in the film, but she's actually deaf in real life, and her scenes involving her father trying to rebuild a cochlear implant are heartbreaking in their own way. Simmonds' character has a lot depth, and while she is an angry teenager that doesn't always make the best decisions, she has her reasons and a specific pain that she carries throughout the film. I won't go into specifics here, but I also love the way that this movie ends. It's kind of abrupt, but you can't help but feel a weird sense of glee at where they decided to cut this film off. It's the kind of smash to black ending that feels instantly iconic. The only real problem I have with the movie, beyond some slight logic holes, which I'm more than willing to let slide because of how well executed this all is, it's the film's music score. It's not a bad score, it works well and it's not used a ton, but I kind of wish it didn't have music at all. I wish the film had a soundscape like Mother. That removes music entirely because of A Quiet Place's concept, but the score doesn't hurt the movie any. A Quiet Place isn't a thematically deep or challenging horror film, but it's great at being a super scary creature feature with a great hook. Try and see this in a theater, because even though there will probably be a few jerks who try to laugh their way through the movie or talk, you'll still feel the air get sucked out of the room for a ton of scenes, and that's worth experiencing. A Quiet Place, starring John Krasinski and Emily Blunt, follows the Abbott family as they survive in the aftermath of an event that leaves the world in ruins and dangerous monsters running around. As the creatures are attracted to sound, the Abbotts have learned to live making as little noise as possible, but after a confluence of events, staying quiet might not be enough anymore. The performances in A Quiet Place are fantastic across the board. Krasinski and Blunt command the screen, believable in both the more intense sequences and the surprisingly tender ones. You truly believe them as parents. Obviously the fact that they're married in real life helps a lot. Krasinski in particular impressed me. He was great in 2016's 13 Hours, but here he shines in a very different way. He authentically cares about his family and is tormented by a strained relationship with his daughter, as well as the events in the film's opening. Krasinski truly embodies his role and his performance moved me nearly to tears. Millicent Simmonds kills it as Reagan, the eldest Abbott child. The character is deaf, as is Simmonds in real life, and that makes for a truly authentic performance. Her scenes with Krasinski are highlights of the film, and their relationship feels so real. The final member of the cast is Noah Jupe, who is also great as the youngest child Marcus. He authentically portrays a relationship between a young boy and his father, and his chemistry with both Blunt and Simmonds is to be commended. There isn't a single weak link in this phenomenal cast. The plot is rather simple overall. A family tries to survive in a world where they can't make a sound, lest they be attacked by monsters. The obvious conflict is brought on after noise is made and monsters attack. What really sets this film apart from other horror movies is how they handle their characters. This family is so authentic and they have real problems, stemming from a horrible tragedy in the beginning of the film. This causes a strain in the family, and creates the most affecting drama I've seen all year. The fact that they do focus on the Abbotts and their problems really helps in the final act, when everything is going to shit and you're rooting for the family to survive. When things turn ugly, it's emotionally devastating, and there is one particular scene that had me choked up all the way through the final moments. I also really have to appreciate the thought that went into how the Abbotts have survived without making noise. Things like playing games with soft pieces rather than metallic or plastic ones, the sand paths that help them make minimal noise, and eating on lettuce leaves instead of plates add detail to their way of life in the nightmare surrounding them. It's very clear that they've taken their time to figure out what not to do in order to stay alive. A Quiet Place is an absolutely gorgeous looking film. The cinematography by Charlotte Bruce Christensen both displays the beauty of the untamed, post-apocalyptic world, as well as magnifies the tension in the monster sequences. I love the way they shoot the monsters early on, deliberately obscuring them and keeping them in the shadows until the end of the film, when they're finally revealed. It's great. There are a couple of frameable shots that I can recall, but mostly I just remember the feeling of being drawn into every frame. Krasinski does a phenomenal job directing the movie. He truly knows how to get the best performance possible out of his actors and actresses. The film is also perfectly paced, without a single wasted moment. A Quiet Place is a breezy 90 minutes, and I didn't find myself bored once. The editing is tight, and the sense of momentum is palpable. Now, I think the most important question on your mind is A Quiet Place scary? The answer to that is, emphatically, yes. From the opening scene to the final frame, the tension doesn't really let up, even amongst the more beautiful or emotional moments. Something always seems amiss and dangerous about this world, with any sound the characters make feeling like it could be their last. And the creatures, when shown, are scary as hell. They work based on sound, but the family doesn't seem to have worked out how much sound is too much, so they just try not to make any. In a lot of sequences, it's so quiet you could hear a pin drop, which magnifies any potentially dangerous sound. This perfectly segues into the sound design, which might be the most important aspect of A Quiet Place. The way that sound bleeds out of the film and how loud the sound is when monsters show up had me jumping out of my seat. I usually hate jump scares, mostly finding them cheap and lazy, but in A Quiet Place they utilize tension in a manner that doesn't allow jump scares to defuse the constant tension. It helps that the majority of the jump scares aren't false. Also interesting is that the sound bleeds out whenever we are viewing things from Regan's perspective, as she's deaf. It actually helps build tension because she can't hear the monsters coming and she can't tell how much noise she's making. True fear in a horror film is fearing something will happen to characters you care about. As stated before, they draw great characters in this film, characters you can really get behind, which, amplified by the excellent sound design, makes the chilling proceedings that much scarier. That is what a horror film should do. The musical score by Marco Beltrami is another highlight. Beltrami has a knack for magnifying tension and helping the already fantastic performances elicit tears from the audience. He did this last year in Logan and pulls it off again with A Quiet Place. His score coupled with the beautiful imagery is so brilliant, all the dialogue could have been excised without detracting from the film. I found myself noticing the score in a good way, noticing how it ramps up the sense of dread, especially at the beginning of the film, and accentuates some of the emotional scenes among the family. Beltrami is quickly becoming one of my favorite film composers. Critics have been raving about this movie, which always makes me go in with trepidation. However, A Quiet Place very nearly lives up to all the glowing reviews. John Krasinski directs and stars alongside real-life wife Emily Blunt as they try to keep their family safe from mysterious creatures that attack as soon as you make a sound. It is essentially a silent movie as the family communicates primarily using sign language, only ever speaking when there is a bigger, louder noise happening, Like a waterfall. Although the first half is a little slow burn, it builds up the tension and lets us get to know this family and care about their plight. The children are the right side of annoying, although frankly the kid with the space rocket got exactly what he deserved. Blunt and Krasinski have real chemistry and are incredibly appealing as the husband and wife doing the best they can to survive this nightmare. The premise is essentially Signs meets Don't Breathe, and once it really gets going you'll be on the edge of your seat as it gets almost unbearably tense. We never find out what the creatures are or where they came from, but we can assume they are aliens, and that makes them all the more terrifying. They are nasty looking too, which ups the threat level nicely. The sound design is the highlight of the movie, with every noise elevated 100 times so when any of the characters jump we saw the same. Our audience was surprisingly well behaved and we could have heard a pin drop throughout. My biggest problem with the movie were some of the character decisions. I mean, there are creatures out there that react to even the slightest sound, so in order to survive you have to remain completely silent. It just seems odd that one of the first things this family decides to do is get pregnant. Babies are the loudest, most awful things in the world, but it's okay because they are going to gas the child to sleep to keep it quiet. I get why they wanted one, but I'd have maybe waited until this whole alien invasion thing blew over, as it just adds to your problems somewhat. It seemed like a very selfish decision on the parents' part, but on the flip side of that I guess it made them feel more human. Overall, A Quiet Place is edge of your seat stuff with a fun premise and genuine tension. It's not quite as good as Don't Breathe, but it's a taut and engaging horror thriller. So now the World Cup has ended in heartbreak, it's time to focus back on the horror movies. It's been a while since my last review, mainly because it's so incredibly time consuming watching 3.5 football matches a day. Now however I'm back, and after managing to catch a showing of A Quiet Place at the cinema in its dying weeks, I thought it's a good place to start to get back into the swing of things. Recently horror has made a more mainstream impact on cinema, with films like Don't Breathe and Get Out grossing a load of money and getting some very decent reviews from the more mainstream media. As such, A Quiet Place got hyped up pretty well. The concept a simple one: sound gets you killed. It's such a unique idea to put into a movie, and it's one I've not seen done before, although I stand corrected if it has been. The story is simple. We can assume from the opening scenes that most of the world has fallen victim to some kind of creature that attacks people who make a noise. This can be any noise from speaking to dropping something on the floor. We're shown this by some old newspaper clippings as a family of 5 search a store for supplies. There's the mum and dad who clearly know exactly what is going on, and their 3 children. It's not long until tragedy strikes in pretty brutal fashion as the monster is slightly revealed. This event leaves the family shocked and upset. They settle into a house that they've soundproofed as much as they can, but these creatures are persistent. As the film rolls on, we get to see more and more of what they look like. At first glance I wasn't too keen on the design. It reminded me of the arachnids from Starship Troopers. Everything seems to be going well for the family, but these things don't last at all, or it wouldn't be a horror film, would it? The young lad is scared all the time, and his sister seems the braver of the family's youngsters. Soon the monsters attack, and the father has to use everything H has learned to keep his family safe, as well as them using their own skills. The film has several tense scenes during all this, where the wife, superbly played by Emily Blunt, has to dodge 2 of the creatures inside the house they built. This is where we start to see more of the creature design, and it's freaking amazing. As I said, I wasn't keen at first, but the scene really turned things around. Everything leads to a tense and action-packed last 20 minutes or so, with every member of the family fighting for their lives. If I told you that a monk, Stephen King, and a father with a newborn baby walked into a bar, you would understandably think I was launching into some hackneyed joke. But if you imagine the conversation that these 3 minds might have, then you could envision the essential elements of A Quiet Place, the perfect blend of silence, terror, and the pressures of raising a family. The movie follows a family of 4: John Krasinski of The Office fame, Emily Blunt, the couple are married in real life as well, and young actors Millicent Simmonds and Noah Jupe as they try to survive in a world that has been overrun by bloodthirsty monsters. The kicker to what seems a standard post-apocalyptic plot: these creatures are completely blind and hunt by homing in on even the slightest sound. In a world where the faintest of sounds can lead to a sudden and savage death, A quiet place is understandably, well, quiet. But in the midst of this silence, A Quiet Place is essentially a parable for raising a family in what oftentimes seems a broken world. As the film's sound editor Eric Edal described it, the unusual silence is like a beautiful Rembrandt or Caravaggio painting where a shaft of light surrounded by darkness makes the scene more beautiful by contrast. Likewise, the actions, expressions, and burdens of a family living in such dark and dire circumstances are given the opportunity to shine in the midst of near silence. And that's exactly what the film does, it lets the family shine as its most intriguing character. When the film begins, 3 months after the unseen invasion occurs, everyone and everything that still lives has adapted. The family communicates through sign language and walks barefoot over strategically placed sand paths so as to remain silent. Birds never make a sound. Doors are never opened or closed. Even crickets have gone silent in order to survive. As the movie's tagline puts it, if they hear you, they hunt you. If I told you that a monk, Stephen King, and a father with a newborn baby walked into a bar, you would understandably think I was launching into some hackneyed joke. But if you imagine the conversation that these three minds might have, then you could envision the essential elements of A Quiet Place, the perfect blend of silence, terror, and the pressures of raising a family. The movie follows a family of four: John Krasinski of The Office fame, Emily Blunt, the couple are married in real life as well, and young actors Millicent Simmonds and Noah Jupe as they try to survive in a world that has been overrun by bloodthirsty monsters. The kicker to what seems a standard post-apocalyptic plot, these creatures are completely blind and hunt by homing in on even the slightest sound. In a world where the faintest of sounds can lead to a sudden and savage death, A Quiet Place is understandably, well, quiet. But in the midst of this silence, A Quiet Place is essentially a parable for raising a family in what oftentimes seems a broken world. As the film's sound editor Eric Edal described it, the unusual silence is like a beautiful Rembrandt or Caravaggio painting where a shaft of light surrounded by darkness makes the scene more beautiful by contrast. Likewise, the actions, expressions, and burdens of a family living in such dark and dire circumstances are given the opportunity to shine in the midst of near silence. And that's exactly what the film does, it lets the family shine as its most intriguing character. When the film begins, 3 months after the unseen invasion occurs, everyone and everything that still lives has adapted. The family communicates through sign language and walks barefoot over strategically placed sand paths so as to remain silent. Birds never make a sound. Doors are never opened or closed. Even crickets have gone silent in order to survive. As the movie's tagline puts it, if they hear you, they hunt you. The power of silence in this film cannot be underestimated. The craft master of horror fiction himself, Stephen King, noted on Twitter that A Quiet Place is an extraordinary piece of work. Terrific acting, but the main thing is the silence, and how it makes the camera's eye open wide in a way few movies manage. The camera's eye is not the only one opening wide. The stakes are made immediately clear just 10 minutes into the film when the family loses their third and youngest child, Cade Woodward, whose innocent desire to play with a toy rocket ship attracts the sound-sensitive creatures. It is a bold move by John Krasinski, who also directs the film, and the writers to show the monsters so early in the film. The tension no longer comes from what the monsters might look like, or in this case sound like, but from the ever-present reality that a single sound could mean death for you and your family. It is a subtle move but one which effectively keeps the focus on the family and the lengths they are willing to go to in order to protect each other. Flash forward a year and the Abbott family, a subtle reference to orders of monks who live in silence perhaps, is still there, though each of them is carrying some kind of burden. The father, Lee Abbott, has become strained by the desire to keep his family happy and unified, something he feels he has already failed to do with the death of his youngest child, but also prepared should he ever be killed. The daughter, Regan Abbott, is deaf and lives with a broken cochlear implant, which means she must be doubly cautious as she cannot hear the sounds of the creatures or if she is making any noise herself. On top of that, Regan blames herself for her younger brother's death. In the mother's case, Evelyn Abbott not only carries the weight of her son's death for which she also feels responsible, but she is now carrying the literal weight of a new child. Evelyn is more than 8 months pregnant and just 3 weeks from her due date in a world where you cannot make a sound. This is where the film begins to stake a major claim in favor of the idea of family. It was common to hear criticism about this plot point in the wake of the movie's release. Much of the commentary went something like this: who is irresponsible enough to get pregnant in a world where you can't make any sound, or who would move forward with a pregnancy when it could put your entire family at risk? The Abbott family, it seems, has had the opposite reaction. They relish the opportunity to have another child, even when it puts a strain on their circumstances. They have banded together by turning a farmhouse cellar into a full-on nursery with padded walls, felt baby toys, and a soundproofed crib for when the baby starts crying. It is a telling sign that as the family prepares for the baby's arrival, they also gather around a dinner table and pray before they eat. They cannot use words, they cannot express their needs, fears, or thankfulness, and one imagines that they cannot fully understand the burdens that each of them is carrying. The only thing that they can do is to be there for one another, to remain a family. It is no wonder that this note of family strength and unity comes through in this film. The idea was perfect. I saw the entire movie within 30 minutes of finishing the script because I was holding my daughter when I was reading the pages, Krasinski told Deadline. I said, if I can actually take this experience of these early days of parenthood, which is pure terror, pure nerves, you're not even a real person, and put that in a movie and make this the best metaphor for parenting that I've ever encountered, that was my goal. It isn't long though before this family's survival is threatened. Lee takes his son Marcus on a routine trip to gather fish from a nearby river, and Regan has run away to visit her younger brother's memorial site, leaving Evelyn unknowingly at home alone when she goes into labor weeks early. The family must run to save Evelyn and the baby, and all of them must decide what they are willing to risk and perhaps even lose in order to protect the family. Perhaps the most touching scene in the film comes in its final moments. Spoiler alert, Marcus and Regan have distracted the monsters long enough for Lee to rescue Evelyn and his newborn son and hide them in the underground nursery. Now Lee must rescue Marcus and Regan from a field where the monsters have gathered. Here, Lee decides to make the ultimate sacrifice. He yells in a last-ditch effort to draw the monster away from his children so that they can escape, but not before signing "I love you" to Regan. Actress Millicent Simmonds, who is deaf in real life and plays Regan, suggested to Krasinski that he amend the line and add "I have always loved you." It was a suggestion that Krasinski said brought him to tears on set, and audiences with him, a suggestion that the love of a family can survive any broken circumstance and any broken world, a suggestion that familial love always remains and can never be silenced. So, say what you want about monks, Stephen King, post-apocalyptic stories, and hackneyed bar jokes, but I think we could use more families like the Abbotts in our world today. A Quiet Place's MPAA rating is PG-13 for terror and some bloody images. John Krasinski directs. Story by Brian Woods and Scott Beck with screenplay by Woods, Beck, and Krasinski. Sound editing and design by Eric Edal, Ethan van der Ryn, and company. Running time, 90 minutes. Justin Petricek is a writer based out of Virginia. He received his MFA in Creative Writing and MA in Literature from George Mason University, as well as an MA in Theology from the Augustine Institute. John Krasinski is our director, and a great one indeed. This is a film of 90 minutes that I literally wanted to be a lot longer. Trust me, my patience for long movies is characteristically low. In this case, however, it was done so well, I wanted to know what the characters did after the first credits appeared. Perhaps other people felt this same desire, considering the sequel comes out this year, A Quiet Place Part 2. That doesn't mean I ached for a sequel, by the way, far be that from me, they are rarely done well in my opinion. The central premise of being hunted by sound is powerful and it works so well. After that, the foreshadowing and character development work together to make this film amazing. I must give a tip of the hat to Krasinski, who also plays the dad/husband of this family and fulfills the role of writer/director. I am utterly impressed with his Herculean work here. A lot of times these days in films, directors use the rule of less is more when it comes to their CGI monsters. They only show parts of the monster and then the audience uses their far more powerful imagination. We are given the full creature here in many scenes, and this really makes the film work. We have an idea what it can do and maybe how it can be destroyed. Needless to say, I am very impressed also the CGI of this film. This is mostly because it serves the story well rather than try to be over the top. I've always believed CGI can help a film's effectiveness, but not without traditional elements of great acting and a stellar script. A Quiet Place has it all. As alluded to before, I kept thinking in this film I was in the film Signs. It was like the same barbecue with different meat. Signs is more of a metaphysical/religious film, whereas this one is just suspense all the way. The ending of both are birds of a feather, and both films have amazing writing that makes the film worthy. The acting is equally astounding. Metacritic has given this film an 85, and I must say I disagree. This film should be closer to 100. Millicent Simmonds, Wonderstruck, steals the show. All cast members deserve awards, but her work as the deaf-loving daughter broke my heart, and I am sure everyone else's in the theater as well. She was amazing, and I await great things from her in the future. You may not know she is deaf in the film as well as in real life. This probably adds an indefinable realism to her scenes. All actors in this film are outstanding. Emily Blunt plays the mother with so much to lose if the creatures hear her. You feel her tedium. Noah Jupe, Ford vs Ferrari, is the brave young brother who knows what to do in the case of a creature attack. To close, this film is categorized/labeled horror, but it's a lot about family and sacrifice. It's also scary as hell. It's suspenseful above all, and though it starts a bit slow, patient audiences will be rewarded. In case you couldn't tell, I recommend this film and give it the highest praise, 10/10. I am reticent to say much about the sequel. We shall see. My last review was for a film may have been burdened with the expectations of its acclaimed director, but it did have an easy in for discussing their prior work, since Isle of Dogs is very recognizably a Wes Anderson joint. John Krasinski, however, has no such defining touches as his two prior works were the almost instantly forgotten Brief Interviews with Hideous Men and the generic and mediocre The Hollers, although they are both comedy dramas with tepid receptions. Instead, he is and will probably always be to most people the guy who smirked to the camera on The Office, though I associate him with Away We Go because I am quite fond of it. But let's make no mistake, he is not this year's Jordan Peele, comedy actor who breaks out into acclaimed horror director with big early year film, even though that describes them both, because A Quiet Place is not Get Out. It's not trying to be, and any comparison is unfair to both films. With it established what A Quiet Place is not, let's establish another thing it is not, a 2000s Platinum Dunes film. I've talked enough about why their films were terrible, but for many horror fans, they will never escape their reputation as crappy remake factory, when lately they have actually been trying, with the Purge films crawling up to mediocrity and Ouija, Origin of Evil being actually good. That's not to say it escapes the scourges of modernity, however, though. The story is a simple one: monsters hunt by sound, so Krasinski, Emily Blunt, and family must be silent to avoid detection. Thankfully for Krasinski the director, the easiest way to make a jump scare is to make everything go quiet and they make a loud noise happen, so his job is easy, and too often the film falls back on this easy trope. Curiously, he also decides to show these monsters early, and often under the mistaken belief that they're boring design. I do admit to liking the effect when they go into super listen mode, however, makes them scary. It does not. That simple story though is an effective hook though. It allows for a very interesting world to be set up, even if it is predicated on Krasinski being awesome at electronics, farming, fishing, basically everything, as well as effective tension. It also forces the movie to be more creative with the way characters communicate. Sorry, that should read the premise does, but the movie seems to be really arbitrary on the level of sound that sets off the detection, and at one point two characters have a conversation at fairly normal volume quite a distance away from a waterfall when it has stopped being much of a distraction. In fact, by the end, it seemed to be contriving more and more ways for characters to talk in dumber and dumber ways. They committed to a premise like Isle of Dogs to convey a tone, but they apparently didn't have confidence in stupid American audiences to be able to handle it. There's one extended sequence late which really capitalizes though on the whole premise, works off suspense instead of jump scares, and climaxes the film perfectly. It's just a shame the movie continues from there, becoming dumber and dumber and losing more and more of my goodwill with maybe one good moment after. The cast is all over the place in quality. Blunt largely carries the film when she shows up, while Krasinski is a nice solid presence the way they always are. It's hard to tell whether he started growing the beard, taking up survivalism, and storing everything in mason jars when the world ended, which really, how were all those newspapers printed in silence, because I completely believe that he was into this shit well beforehand. His deaf daughter, well, she starts off so well, but I don't know if the writing is to blame or she is, as the film moves from curious ambivalence to spelling everything out explicitly. The sons are just terrible. As much as I've harped on the film's flaws, I did like the movie mostly. There's an awful lot of what could have been. The visuals are good, even rising to great during that one sequence that feels like someone more talented briefly took over directing, and I wish Krasinski felt confident in them instead of relying on dialogue. What is it with films this week? Isle of Dogs didn't spend enough time on the Isle of Dogs, and A Quiet Place was too loud, suffering in the moments when it got away from what it did best, and not just from the stupidity of all the unnecessary noise characters would make. A Quiet Place is a science fiction horror film with competently executed formal elements that largely capitalize on the potential of the novel premise. Giant spider-like creatures have invaded. They are armored and deadly but blind, relying on their extraordinary sense of hearing to hunt their human prey. The story focuses on a family forced to live a near-silent existence in order to survive. Real-life wife and husband, Emily Blunt and John Krasinski, play the mother and father. They have a younger son, Noah Jupe, and an elder daughter, Millicent Simmonds, who is deaf. The family walks around on their bare feet and use sign language to communicate. The setting is confined to their farm in the country, the surrounding woods, and a few abandoned towns. The mother is expecting a child, and the prospect of a screaming newborn gives impetus to their efforts to create a quiet place in the cellar beneath their barn. As I noticed at the movie theater, the restrained and quiet premise encourages the audience to hush up and silently watch the events unfold on screen. The quiet, careful attention heightens the impact of the film, especially when loud noises or sudden movements upset the imposed quiet. Krasinski, who directs and also had a hand in the screenplay, along with Brian Woods and Scott Beck, has put together a memorable first film. Unfortunately, repetition is the weakness of A Quiet Place. It's the nature of horror films to establish formal patterns and then to build on or develop them over the course of the film, essentially teaching the viewer how to be scared or excited while watching the film. There are conventional tactics for scaring and generating suspense in viewers, and part of the pleasure of watching horror films is to note how each film develops and varies these conventional tactics. For instance, M. Night Shyamalan's Signs, a sci-fi suspense thriller that's comparable to A Quiet Place in terms of its confined setting and alien monsters, is a great example of a film never generating tensions and scaring the audience in exactly the same way twice. Conversely, the new It, while incredibly creepy and effective at times, doesn't vary its pattern for scaring the audience enough. Each time the monster appears to the children, it goes about scaring them using the same approach. In A Quiet Place, Krasinski displays some effective techniques, such as representing the oral subjectivity of characters and using narrow focal points and slow pans to reveal things nearby the character that we didn't know were present. For example, Krasinski soon establishes a pattern of quiet, pan to reveal something, silence, and then a sound to startle the character or monster as well as the viewer. The problem is that once he establishes his patterns for building tension and scaring us, he repeats them a few too many times, without enough variation. While A Quiet Place doesn't fully satisfy in terms of horror and suspense, it is thematically satisfying. However, I would also note that the themes are not subtle, in the manner of most sci-fi fables. The film considers the role of parents as protectors. It asks, what freedoms do you restrict to ensure your children's survival and flourishing while also letting them develop as capable individuals? It's an essential parenting question magnified by the extraordinary situation of the premise. This is where the film shines. The thematic and dramatic sides of the film almost certainly benefit from the strong connection Blunt and Krasinski bring to and maintain on screen, but they also convey strong connections to their on-screen children. I found out after seeing the film that Millicent Simmonds is deaf in real life. This in part explains her convincing performance. A Quiet Place might be novel in conceit, but it also forms a lot of connections to other, similar films in the alien invasion subgenre. Its compressed vision of what seems to be a large-scale invasion was anticipated by parts of Spielberg's War of the Worlds, 2005. The connection between disability and a creature invasion surely owes to John Wyndham's 1951 post-apocalyptic novel, The Day of the Triffids, in which carnivorous, slow-moving plants are only able to take over the world because most of humanity has been blinded by a comet. However, A Quiet Place inverts and duplicates the dynamic. The creatures have a disability, blindness, and a strength, incredible hearing, and the humans have to adapt to the new conditions by limiting their abilities. They have to live mutely to survive. I should note that the daughter's deafness is congenital, and that her supposed weakness has also aided her family's survival, such as by giving them the ability to communicate through sign language. The post-apocalyptic American countryside reminded me of Season 2 of The Walking Dead, but the focus on one family trying to survive in the wasteland, as well as some of the film's starker choices, also recall Cormac McCarthy's devastating 2006 novel, The Road, along with the 2009 film adaptation. I was reminded of The Road at one point when the son and father glimpse pieces of a horrifying scenario playing out in a weird, creepy old house. A Quiet Place is a competent sci-fi horror film, but those obsessed with plausibility and plot holes, conventionally understood, will probably object to parts of the film, if not the entire premise. There are valid nitpicks, but don't get too hooked on the logic of everything. Nitpicking implausibility can pull apart any Twilight Zone-esque sci-fi what-if story. Personally, if a film convinces me on the dramatic level, I'm usually willing to go along with a creative premise, even one that veers into the unlikely, in part as an antidote to our current cinematic universe of risk-averse franchises and generic repetitions. In A Quiet Place, there are enough pleasing narrative, dramatic, and thematic variations to make up for the stiff formal repetitions. It follows a post-apocalyptic family who needs to stay quiet every single day as the aliens who hunt by sound surround their house. This is honestly an extremely authentic, brilliant idea that was mostly flawlessly executed, leading to such an outstanding, original film, and the fact that we got such originality in 2018 no less is astounding and needs to be appreciated, though I could definitely see the sign's influence in certain scenes. So the film is basically a silent film when it comes to dialogue, as for the majority of time the family members do not talk at all. But the sound design is amazing and they perfectly use sign language here along with the hearing device, and, yes, the fact that they turned that device into a weapon was a genius idea. The film is about fighting your fears and using your biggest fear to fight, which was wonderful to witness. I did find the first half of the film, mostly the first act, rather slow at times and uneventful. It was a necessary, but still not investing build-up. But that all changed with the second half, which hooks you in and lets go with a terrifying scene after another and superbly executed action sequences. It truly has clever action for a horror film. Emily Blunt is a great actress and her performance here is reliably fantastic, but this is a different role for her as she has to rely on facial expressions throughout the whole runtime, and she excelled beautifully at those. It was a very difficult role with the pregnancy in particular, but she admirably pulled it off and is the best part of the film in terms of the acting. But in terms of the characters, Lee and Regan are the heart and soul of the film. Marcus and Evelyn are fine, but these two are the real stars. They actually managed to include a troubled father-daughter relationship into the mix, and they played it off as important to the story and the eventual conclusion beautifully. It thus managed to be a moving drama as well as a horror flick. John Krasinski is surprisingly good here, whereas Millicent Simmonds is stupendous too, and the fact that they cast a deaf girl in real life to play a deaf character is rather admirable. A Quiet Place does have a couple of plot holes here and there, but for the most part it's pretty easy to buy into, as the filmmakers definitely thought almost about everything and thus created a believable post-apocalyptic world and plausible situations. I truly admired the attention to detail that went into this production, as it's rather meticulous, especially for this genre. The direction from John Krasinski is phenomenal, and he's the reason why this film works so well, and this ought to propel his career as a director much further. The pacing is also effective, as it's very economic despite that slow first act. The film flies by how fun and intense it is, while also having an effectively short runtime of just 80 minutes. The film manages to be immensely scary at times, and the fact that they pulled off the look of the alien so well despite such a small budget is honestly baffling to me. The design is rather original with the ears, the behavior of the creature is intriguing, and the VFX are splendid. One of my favorite scenes is the silo sequence along with the death scene, which is heartbreaking as well as a smart ending and frightening childbirth. There's a thin line between an original and a gimmicky movie. The latter abides by the codes of an already popular genre, yet has one twist or quirk that it uses to market itself: a vampire movie, in space, or a zombie movie where the hero is a zombie himself. These are gimmicks. They're unlikely twists on something unoriginal and already popular that are supposed to differentiate the movie, like a name tag is supposed to identify you at a corporate convention. A Quiet Place is a gimmicky movie. It's riding the dying wave of disoption movies, but adds one twist to it: its characters are forced to live in silence. The year is 2020 and blind predators have taken over the earth. They are bigger and faster than human beings, have teeth like knives and body armor and supernatural hearing skills, but their blindness allows human beings to survive for as long as they live in silence. The Abbotts have settled on an abandoned farm and are doing their best to survive without making a sound until the day Evelyn, Emily Blunt, becomes pregnant. Bringing a kid into this world is somewhat of a noisy endeavor, and, of course, her waters are breaking in advance, while her husband Lee, John Krasinski, and her other kids are out. Hilarity, and jump scares, ensue. So yeah, A Quiet Place is jump scare city. Writer and director John Krasinski milks that silent gimmick in order to set up as many different kind of jump scares as possible. There are ambient noises jump scares, film score jump scares, monsters jump scares, fake jump scares, you get the gist. It's not really scary, it just games your nervous system in order to make you uncomfortable. A Quiet Place has little to offer in terms of memorable scenes. The only one I could remember 24 hours after the viewing is the flooded basement scene, where Emily Blunt had to protect her baby from the monster that slips underwater at some point. A dialogue-free movie is not what we think of for a wide release from a major studio, but Paramount has again, after Mother and Annihilation, released a surprisingly original film with indie or Arthouse roots. Directed by John Krasinski, The Office, and written by him and indie horror filmmakers Scott Beck and Brian Woods, A Quiet Place centers on a family living on a farm months after a catastrophe has happened. Monsters now roam the earth. They have hypersensitive hearing and come after any creature that makes a sound. This requires the father, Krasinski, and mother, Emily Blunt, Edge of Tomorrow, to raise their family in complete silence. The characters communicate in sign language because the slightest noise could bring an untimely end. Sound editing and sound mixing are never the most anticipated awards at the Oscars, but A Quiet Place is easily this year's front runner. The sound designers crafted nuance within the film's limited noises. Rather than alternating between quiet and loud to create jump scares, as most horror movies do, the film showcases the gradations of silence. The sound designers understood the differences between complete silence, the muffled reverberations heard by the deaf daughter, and the gentle room tone heard by the characters as they carefully go about their routines. These act as audio settings for the film that clue the viewer into both the character we are focusing on and the particular dangers they face. The film's premise is ripe with tension. When any noise can spell disaster, every step is potentially deadly, and the writers continually introduce creative ways to play with noise. These setups never feel contrived because the script links them to character traits. The daughter is deaf, so she doesn't realize when something is making noise, which puts her in several precarious spots. The wife is pregnant, which we know will not end in a silent birth. Krasinski, whose previous films have been less than stellar, directs these scenes with slow, smooth tracking shots that match the cast's own cautious movements. Each situation is replete with danger, and there is a palpable sense of relief when death is narrowly avoided. Yet, these moments are only brief reprieves. Death is always one clumsy gesture away. With a script fraught with inventive set pieces and direction that creates unyielding suspense, A Quiet Place is the rare horror film that can sustain an inescapable anxiety and perpetual unease. This is a script that wastes no time on exposition. No background information about the monsters is given. We don't know where they came from, how they got there, or even what to call them, and the film is no less for it. The key points are made immediately. They hear sounds, and if they hear yours, it's all over. The film's focus is on the brief set of encounters the family has with the monsters. Each of these is cleverly foreshadowed. We see what objects will be used, but not how, and what will be an issue, but not when. Instead of being surprised to learn that a character has a new obstacle in their path, we are trapped in fear, knowing what adversity awaits them but unable to do anything about it. Movies can be frustrating in any number of ways, but maybe the most frustrating is when an almost great movie misses that target for just one dumb reason. Witness A Quiet Place, which is microscopically close to being my favorite American thriller in at least several months, maybe even a year or two, and instead has to settle all the way down at, well, that was pretty okay, and I think you could do a lot worse than seeing it. And the gulf between those points is pretty much all down to two things, one of which is that the last 10 minutes or thereabouts, of an agreeably trim 90-minute feature, suddenly take a swift dive into completely arbitrary plot points and swerves, and ruin all the tentative goodwill I had for a film that is practically built out of arbitrary leaps in logic that screenwriters Brian Woods and Scott Beck and John Krasinski hope we won't notice or think too hard about. I noticed, sometimes, I noticed very hard. But that's really just the last 10 minutes. The bigger and more pervasive and sometimes actually damaging problem is that A Quiet Place has a non-diegetic musical score, and it really shouldn't. The reason for this is that, as much as it pretends not to be, A Quiet Place is a gimmick film. It's the post-apocalypse, 89 days post the apocalypse, as we're told by a title card right at the outset. In bits and pieces of information communicated by things like desperately scrawled out whiteboards, discarded newspapers, and the like, we find that this apocalypse was caused by a race of aliens that move like coked-up jungle cats and have the slimy texture of Resident Evil cannon fodder, but it's not so very important what they are or where they come from, as how they hunt. The species has no eyes, and no sense of smell, but an extraordinary sense of hearing, which permits them to exactly pinpoint the sound of animals moving from at least several hundred yards away. The survivors of their hungry onslaught, and from all we see, it doesn't appear that there are very many survivors at all, are those that have learned to move and live as silently as possible. One such crew of survivors are the 5 members of the Abbott family. There are no names spoken in the movie. This all comes from the end credits. Evelyn, Emily Blunt, and Lee Krasinski, and their kids Reagan, Millicent Simmonds, Marcus, Noah Jupe, and Bo, Cade Woodward, who had a small advantage. Reagan cannot hear, so the whole family already knew sign language. We learn all of this slantwise, the film's opening sequence plunges us directly into a world of horribly tense silence, as the family moves through a ruined town scavenging for whatever goods and food hasn't been picked over. Practically no dialogue is spoken in the film, for obvious reasons, and so we figure out the mood long before we figure out the plot, and that mood is utterly exhausted and terrified. A Quiet Place is uniquely sensitive to being fucked up by a bad audience, but when I saw it in a packed theater, the immediate, tangible sense of alertness in the room at the realization that the film would in fact be playing at a very quiet level indeed, and every single rustle, creak, and distant bang would be placed with gravest care by the sound mixing team, this was almost a holy thing, one of the best in-theater experiences I've had in an extremely long time. The feeling of several dozen human souls all obviously trying not to breathe, it is the reason movies in a theater still matter. Anyway, the film plays this out in its amazing opening sequence, ratcheting up the tension as far as it can go by making every mild sound effect feel like a gun going off next to your head, and if this is a gimmick when all is said and done, it's a fucking great gimmick. And then, at a certain point, music. I do not blame Marco Beltrami for doing his job, but it was a bad job to have done. We could talk about whether A Quiet Place has anything to say about parental sacrifice or the need for family in times of great struggle. It pretends like it does, but I think that's just a trick, but it's really about the great sanctity of silence, and the brain-shattering discomfort of having that silence unexpectedly ruptured. And you just can't do that if there's going to be a score. It's an audio cue that breaks the silence for the viewer but not the characters, and when the entire film is built on a foundation of every audio cue being laden with meaning, that cheapens the whole damn experience. So here we are, where we started, A Quiet Place, which is a pretty neat thriller with some fine set pieces, and a lattice work of very dubious plot contrivances. About a year after the opening, the Abbotts have settled into a large, abandoned farmhouse. Lee is constructing a sound-dampened survivalist compound in the basement, the biggest of the film's plot holes. By far, we see that the basement is in fact largely safe from the monsters, so why do they not just stay in the basement? And Evelyn is pregnant. Very pregnant, in fact, and the question of how to keep a newborn baby alive in an environment where any sound is fatal is the most pressing of many problems facing the family in a film that has less of a plot than a chain of individual crises as they almost get violently dismembered and eaten by one of the three monsters in the woods nearby. There's a slight sameness to the set pieces, a noise is inadvertently made, the aliens come, it takes some incredible self-control to be silent long enough for them to go away. It's kind of like the kitchen scene from Jurassic Park repeated over and over again for the length of a feature, and at its best, A Quiet Place even achieves almost that level of quality. Krasinski, directing his third feature but only his first thriller, has a deft hand for using the empty space in medium close-ups to stage all kind of nerve-wracking unpleasantness, and the film makes a very wise decision very early on to demonstrate the aliens' lethal effectiveness in a way that instantly raises the stakes for the whole film. This is not a movie where you take it for granted that the good guys will win, let us say. The thing is, there are only so many times one can watch the same basic scenario of the aliens, marvelously gooey CGI effects, go through the same basic motions before it loses its sting, and the film is much too willing to fill in the gaps in its soundtrack with Beltrami's energetic, but largely generic horror movie score. So after a phenomenal opening and a very good, artfully done stretch of exposition in the first half hour, A Quiet Place ends up diluting its effectiveness enough that it becomes way too easy to notice all the storytelling cheats, the blatant hand-holding in a movie that starts off so subtly. What is their weakness? Screams a whiteboard written by a man who probably does not have to remind himself to wonder what their weakness is, and the big dramatic events that occur solely because the characters are obligingly stupid at narratively convenient moments. I still like the film, and my god, if you want to see it in a theater. Immersion in a distraction-free, sound-controlled environment is key to all its effect, and I don't care who you are, your living room isn't that. But it comes within an eyelash of being a great modern classic of the thriller genre, and it's awfully irritating that it fails for such a pointless reason. This film, directed by John Krasinski. Screenplay by Brian Woods. Story by Brian Woods, Scott Beck. Produced by Michael Bay. Starring Emily Blunt. Cinematography Charlotte Brewis Christensen. Edited by Christopher Tellefson. Music by Marco Beltrami. Production companies Paramount Pictures. Distributed by Paramount Pictures. Release dates March 9, 2018. Running time 90 minutes. Country United States. Languages English. Budget $17 million. Box office $341 million.